Welcome to episode 124 of the Loane Hockey Podcast, where today we're going to be talking about some standouts in last night's matchup between Pittsburgh and Washington. And it was really fun to watch another really exciting showcase between the two. And of course, you have Sidney Crosby and Alex Ovechkin going head to head. So, with Pittsburgh's side, Erik Karlsson looked really good this game. I thought he had a tremendous showing, and he had a really nice goal where he was activating off the puck into the middle of the ice and into the mid slot area. And then he caught the pass from Evgeny Malkin off the wall into that middle of the ice, and then he was able to rip it and score that goal. And that was a big goal for them at the time. And Carlson showed really good activation throughout this game. His ozone play is really good, and he's a guy who's very active off the blue line and plays almost as if he's another forward on the ice. So you always want him engaged in the rush and also in transition, and also at the same time being able to have him active in the ozone is very important to the structure of the Penguins and how they're able to execute offensively, and doing so at both even strength and the power play as well. So Carlson looked really good as a puck mover this game. His passes look good. His breakouts look good. He looked like the traditional Erik Karlsson we saw over a decade ago when he was playing with Ottawa, and how dominant he was during that time. And he was really good overall. And then speaking of which, Evgeny Malkin, 2 point game. Carlson had a 2 point game as well. Malkin looked really good. He looked really good in terms of his playmaking and his ability to generate, and how he was making passes that led his teammates into space. And he was doing a really good job of that this game. I thought he was executing on the puck really well, making those passes, but also timing his decisions right. And it allowed him to gain control of ozone and being able to control the perimeter of the ice as a playmaker, and also small area sequences as well. He was really good in small areas and handling the puck and handling contact in small areas. Michael Bunting's a guy who, ever since being acquired from, he was acquired from Carolina, and ever since then, he's been really good for Pittsburgh. He's been a really good fit for them. I feel like as part of the Jake Gensel trade, being able to get an NHL caliber player who can be a top six forward is really good for this Penguins team. And Bunting's a guy who's been reliable inside that top nine role for them. He can play up and down the top nine. He can play a third line checking role, but also bring some skill and some hard skill. And at the same time, he can be a complementary player for a guy like Sidney Crosby. And so Bunting's a guy that really helps, and he's really fit that role really well inside their top nine. And obviously, they have some degree of winger depth, but not necessarily a ton. So by having Bunting there and being able to have him complement many different lines is very versatile for Pittsburgh in terms of how they want to use him. And of course, he can play PK, he can play power play, he can play 5-on-5, he can play a lot of different situations that, and he can be very reliable for Pittsburgh in general. And then Sidney Crosby, of course, I thought Sidney Crosby, he stands out every game, but what I really like about him, and what I really admire about watching him, is his ability to execute in small areas so consistently, even at this age. And I understand some guys slow down at this age, and some guys maintain that consistency over time. And Crosby's one of those guys who's able to be consistent because he's been so dominant for so long. And it really doesn't seem like he's ever aged based on his ability and how consistent he's been in the league. But just his small area play and how he's able to handle small areas. He's not necessarily the biggest player. Obviously, he's strong, but he's not the biggest, and he's able to execute with his hockey sense and his anticipation, his proactive brain. He's just so smart in small areas, and it's so fun to watch still to this day because he may not show the most flash when he's in small areas, but he's able to execute little details that other players miss and other centers miss. So one of those guys who stands out consistently, and you almost know when he's in a small area sequence, he's going to escape the pressure. And you don't get that feeling with many players, but obviously he's one of them. And he's really unique in that sense, especially given the sense how many players nowadays are so fast or so quick. And even the guy he was playing against, Alex Ovechkin plays with a lot of pace in his game. Sidney Crosby isn't necessarily the fastest in terms of foot speed or speed in general, separation speed, having that extra gear to his skating. But his timing is always impeccable. His routes are always really good. He understands where to be. And like I said, he's very proactive in terms of his anticipation and things along those lines. So Crosby's always exciting to watch. I always enjoy watching him every single game, and it never gets old watching him. He's so exciting to watch, and there's always something you can take away from his game when watching. And there's some other players that stood out, like Chris Letang was good, Noel Achari was good, Marcus Pettersson had one of the better showings I've seen from him thus far, and Brian Rust looked like Brian Rust. He looked like a playoff style player who is very used to playing against Washington, has played against Washington for quite some time in his career, and again, similar to Bunting in a sense, where he can be a guy that can move up and down the top nine. I would say Russ now, in terms of his play, when he started his career, he was more of a middle six and top nine style winger. Now he's more of a consensus top six winger on this team. He complements Sidney Crosby really well on one of the wings. You can add Drew O'Connor to Crosby's wing. You can add anybody to Crosby's wing, let alone. But at the same time, Brian Russ is that really good complementary player, has been for quite some time for Crosby, and really fits that role. And then we'll talk about Joel Blomqvist. He was excellent in net, excellent in his tracking, excellent in his angles. I was really impressed with how he's handling rebound opportunities, how he's handling chaotic situations like late game, where Washington was trying to make a comeback. They pulled the goalie 3 minutes to go, which is a little risky being down by one, but better to take risks than none at all. So with them pulling their goalie so early into the third, and Blomqvist had to deal with a fair degree of shot volume inside the 6-on-5 that he had to deal with because of Washington pulling their goalie. He looked really good managing the game. It's gonna be interesting to see what they do with him because Tristan Jarry at some point's gonna have to come back up and play to what he originally earned on his contract and it hasn't earned so far. But at the same time, if Jari is able to make a comeback and play better than ever, you have one waiver exempt goalie in Joel Blomqvist that will probably get sent back down. Yes, he's been playing really well, but unfortunately, sometimes they have to make hard decisions, and he's probably going to have to go back down to Wilkes-Barre at some point. And Nedeljkovic, at the same time, he's a guy who's eligible for waivers. So if you try to send him down, it might not work so easily. So with Tristan Jarry at some point they'll have to call him back up, and I would imagine they'll have a tandem of Nedeljkovic and Jarry again at some point. But Blomqvist again, he looked really good in that yesterday, and was really impressed with his play and his start to the season. On Washington's side, we're going to talk about Hendrix Lapierre, his playmaking, his ability to move off the puck, his ability to interpret space. His hockey sense looks much more adjusted to the NHL this season. And since playing in the AHL and over his development stint there and how he's adapted to the NHL thus far, his brain and the timing and his decisions look more suitable for the NHL now. And he looks better as a playmaker in general. And I've liked his game. And I feel like he's going to be a good player over the next handful of years for them. And he looked really good. Andrew Mangiapane looked really good for Washington as well. And then you have, of course, Connor McMichael, who's having a really good season thus far, and Alexi Protas, another guy who's playing like the top six winger and has played really well for Washington. And I've really liked Protas's game. Big winger who can play a little bit of center, but at the same time thrives more on the wing in terms of his checking ability and how he's able to forecheck as that F1, F2 type guy and how he can go hard in on the forecheck and be able to close space so quickly. He's got a powerful degree of skating and separation speed that allows him to close space on the forecheck with ease. I've liked Protas's game, and I feel like he's really evolved as a player this far. It's gonna be interesting to see how he continues his scoring pace throughout the season, but he's been a very productive player for them, and I imagine he's going to continue that over the course of the season as well. And then Rasmus Sandin had one of two goals for Washington this game. He looked really good as a passer, really good on line rush against. I liked his angles and how he's able to shut play down on transition defense scenarios. And he did a good job being able to execute on that in terms of his details. And his outlet passes were good. They were crisp, they were firm, they were accurate. And he was making stretch passes really well. And he's very active as an East West style playmaker in terms of his passing game. And Tom Wilson, Jacob Vrana, two guys that also stood out in terms of their ability. Tom Wilson looked really good as a checker and looked really engaged on the puck and off the puck. So a lot of different scenarios, of course, that Tom Wilson's involved in, and he's been a marquee player for the Caps for quite some time now, and he's going to continue to fit that role for quite some time.